Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Streaming Alchemy Show. I'm John Mahoney. And on today's show, we're going to be taking a look at set design and some of the things that you should probably consider if you're looking to either build or redo your current live streaming setup. But before we get that, a couple of quick things. First, we want to apologize for last week. I actually had what I thought was the flu, turned out to be pneumonia, and was really knocked off air for not just last Friday, but for a good part of this week as well. So I have some tea with me here. So if my apologies in advance for the unprofessionalism of possibly drinking on camera, but just wanted to let all you know that I'm glad to be back and getting this show off, and apologize for missing last week. So thanks everybody for following. So the other thing before we jump in is I want to welcome anybody who'd like to call into the show. I assure you, we're not contagious over the live stream, so it's totally safe. And if you want to join us, this would be something that'd be great to share your own experiences with either things that frustrate you with current sets that you work on, or some thoughts and ideas you may have. And we will also be having a post show. And on the post show, we'll be taking a look at some of the thoughts we have for redesigning our studio here. So that's something, we have some 3D renders and other things. So if you'd like to stick around for that, we'd love to have you. And we'd love to get any feedback you had on that, because we're really throwing it out there to get the expertise of everybody in our community here to, help steer us so we don't make mistakes that we'll then have to, correct in the third iteration of the set. All right, so why don't we get started? Uh, think about building a set. There are lots of different dimensions that go into that. So it's everything from the space itself to the needs of productions to budget and other limitations that you have with what you can do. But I think the place to start is really in looking at first the physical considerations. What is it you have to think about when you are looking at designing a set? So the first piece here is the space that you have to work with. And when you're dealing with a video production space, you have to think of multiple aspects of the physical space you have. The first is actually the layout, the floor space that you have available to you. So, what type of set do you want to build? How deep and how wide is that set going to be? If you are going to be adding additional equipment to that space. Oh, Ken, how are you? Welcome. Thanks for joining. If you want to add equipment to that space, where can you place that equipment? Uh, you also have to think, when you think of this physical space, of isolation too, because if you have equipment makes noise, like computers and other things are wont to do, uh, you have to have a way to make sure that you isolate that noise actual production set that you're going to be shooting from. So, so when we think about floor space, the floor space obviously is critical because it sort of defines the big footprint. But it isn't the only aspect. The other thing that you have to consider is ceiling height. Ceiling height is going to impact a lot of things. The first is it's going to impact where you can place lights. So for us, we have a very low ceiling. It's under 8 feet here. So we have to work with lights that are stand mounted on the floor, connecting floor to ceiling and shining at us in a more horizontal aspect. You have the ability with more ceiling height to bury the lights up in the ceiling, and then you get to place them anywhere. The limitation we have when we place lights on the floor is that you have camera angles that you have to make sure you respect. And so you don't want the light poles or the lights themselves in any of the shots that you're shooting with the cameras. When you have that up in a ceiling, it makes it much easier. You don't have to deal with that. Have when you look at that is, how do I connect everything up? If I have a ceiling, I have channels now that I can set up specifically to run cabling from one location to the other. And this is going to impact where you place your control room. So if you want to do a show that's basically a one-man show where everything is on the desk, you have a computer beside you, and you don't really have wiring going broadly throughout the studio, that's fairly simple then. You don't really need the same types of considerations. But if you're doing something that requires more space, has more people involved, then those things become important. Not just for wiring, though, but also for communication. One of the things most people who aren't, sort of on this side of a production, what they don't recognize is how much communication needs to happen between on air talent and the people in the control space. Everything from things they're going to do through an IFB to prep you, but also a lot of visual cues, letting you know if there's a caller, letting you know if there's a problem, or if they need some more time to do something. All these things have to be communicated. And so when you think about the physical space you're going to be using, it's important that you bring that piece into it. How am I going to be connected mechanically, electrically, as well as visually or orally with the group so we can communicate? The other piece that you have to think about now, in certain situations, the acoustic, uh, in, and everything is going to, there'll be dead ends. You won't have a lot of reflections. There won't be echoes. That's not, so. I'm told we're having some audio problems here. What I'll do is just give this placement over here on the side of the desk to see if that makes things better, and we'll go from there. So hopefully, if you are hearing me, hearing any audio issues, please just let us know in the comments. But we seem to be hearing it here. So, and appropriately enough, this is the section on acoustics. So one of the things that you really want to make sure you don't have is echo. Echo is the most obvious and annoying thing for your viewers, the people who are listening to you talk. And that's something that you need to avoid at all costs. So some of that can be avoided by the microphone choice. So this microphone is very close to where I'm speaking. It sort of comes around as a loop off my ear, and this tends to just not capture a lot of the room ambience, the room sound at all, and that can help. The other piece is you can have things that are going to be treatments you can put in. So everybody's seen the big moving blankets. They actually work for deadening sound. They don't work if you have noisy neighbors or loud traffic outside, so that's not going to help at all there. But they will definitely help deaden the sound, stop these reflections. Uh, the other thing, then, when you are dealing with these acoustical issues, uh, will be what are the sound surfaces that I have in my set? So, very hard surfaces are going to reflect sound, soft surfaces are going to deaden them. Sounds that are generated between two flat parallel surfaces will echo back and forth. So sometimes it may be that if you turn the set so that you're not in these having these parallel walls between yourself and the sound, that's another thing that can help deaden echoes. But a lot of it is just going to be working with the space you have, working with the set you design, and making sure that you are sympathetic to what you'll need to do acoustically, but recognize that at the end of the day, you'll have to deal with what's left over and using sound deadening material, using off angle surfaces that can sort of deflect sound so it doesn't form these standing waves back and forth. Those things are all going to be useful for you. The other thing to think about when you think about the physical space is lighting control. And now, what I'm not talking about here is sort of your DMX board where you control the levels and the colors and everything of all your lighting. What I'm talking about controlling is the light that exists in the space. So, one of the beautiful light sources we have is the sun. The problem you have, though, is that it will change throughout the day. It changes based on the day, it changes based on the season. So, when you have a lot of natural light coming in, while that can be a great thing for certain types of shots you want to do, you need to be able to control it as completely as possible. So you'll find that a lot of studios have no windows, and some of that could be because of acoustics. Glass is a hard, solid surface; it lets sound in from the outside. Those things. But the other thing is lighting. If you want complete control of the light in your space, the best thing you can do is have no windows or block out completely, sort of black shades, the windows that you have. If you have good windows and good lighting, I would recommend going with, you know, black shading, so you could open it up and use it if the need arose and you wanted to capture a certain look with the natural sunlight. But I would definitely think in the space, assessing a space, to assume that you have no outside light and get the set illuminated correctly with the lights you have, the artificial light sources you have inside the set itself. Now, the color of the light, you're going to use daylight, you're going to use tungsten. That's all, those are aesthetic choices, choices around what you have, choices around budget. But one of the things to consider with lighting, and we've mentioned this in previous shows, is that lighting follows the inverse square law in terms of intensity. So if you have great high ceilings, understand that you're placing those lights potentially fairly high up and far away from the talent. So you may need more lights or you may need brighter lights or both. So as you think about the lighting in the space, consider placement and then consider the amount of light you'll need to successfully illuminate everything on the set. Another thing about lighting when we talk about sets is we're not just lighting talent. So you will also, in almost every situation, be lighting up the set as well. Some of those are going to be purely aesthetic. I want to have sort of blue lights glowing, in the space behind me, or I want it, sort of cool, green and red lights on the sides during certain events. All those types of things are generated by the aesthetic of the set and potentially of a particular production. But that's something when you think about lighting, you should think about in total because you want, if you're lighting things on the set, to make sure you have a way of controlling how that light can also hit the talent. So these things all combine, and it requires real planning around how you want to make that lighting package work for you. The other thing, which I had touched on, in the beginning, was wire pathways. The worst thing you can do in a space is to just have wires everywhere on the floor. And I know for all of us, we have a tendency to do that, and things can get a little chaotic. But the more you can do in a permanent style installation, the more enjoyable the studio is going to be to work in. You won't always be tripping over things or watching where you step so you don't step on things. You really want to get as much off the floor as you can. You want to concentrate the things that are on the floor into bundles that you can sort of do as runs. Uh, and ideally, you'd like to push as much up high or up against walls or other non trafficked areas. And, so things that you could have like these wire racks that can run across ceilings, these are perfect for that. But it's something you should consider because everything that you want to light or wire for sound or put a camera in or put a data path in through an Ethernet connection, all of those wires have to run somewhere. So plan that as much as you plan any other physical aspect of your set design. So the other thing we talked about though is that the production that you want to put on, or productions if it's a general purpose studio, will also impact the design of the set. Oh, let me get some of my tea here. Uh, so, the first one, and probably the one that's going to impact everything else that you do inside the set, is camera placement. And even more importantly, is it a single camera production or is it going to be a multi camera production? Single camera productions allow you to really have one fixed shot that you have the talent talking to. So that makes things fairly simple, one angle that you don't, have to, worry about, putting wires in or anything. Everything else then can be part of the broader set. uh, but when you go to multi-camera, then things become much more complicated when it comes to dealing with the layout on the set. The first is that you need to make sure that each one of the shots captures what you want without capturing the garbage in the background, all the offset stuff, the lighting, diffusers, uh, backset, openings where you're storing gear, any of those things. So you have to make sure when you design the set, you're sympathetic to the camera angles you want and make sure that those are fully blocked out and you know exactly what's going to be on camera and off camera when you do that. But the other thing is lighting. It becomes more complicated with multiple cameras. Now, we've mentioned it before, but the concept of sort of 3 point lighting applies generally. What you're really trying to do is illuminate the subject, fill in the shadows, and then have a rear light that creates separation. So you're really looking to do all of those things, even when you have multi camera and multiple people on set. But sometimes this will mean that you can't use traditional 3 point lighting. You may need to use lighting which becomes more of a general wash and at least set some baseline level with that wash lighting. Then use lighting to create more highlights. So almost the exact opposite as opposed to light and fill in shadows, sort of do general illumination, basically create the shadow first, and then use point lights to specifically illuminate subjects more clearly. And you still need to create that separation. When you have a set design, you now have the ability to create separation multiple ways. So it doesn't all have to be driven by light. Yeah. Hi, John. Thanks for joining us. That's great. Uh, I agree. I mean, having an open space to work in is fantastic, but it's not something that everybody normally has available to them. We certainly didn't. You work with the space you have, but I agree. The more real estate you have, the more choices you can make. Sometimes you're just dealt a hand and you have to work around it. But the other point I was making around separation is that as opposed to simply saying the only way I create separation is through sort of a rim light where I illuminate the shoulders to do that, you can also create separation by lighting the set. I can create depth in the set. So I could have something where I have one layer, one wall, and another wall slightly sort of behind that wall. And I have lighting that's taking place here. So now you can create a sense of depth with lighting, not just by illuminating the talent, but by illuminating the set in ways that create this depth and separation. So you have a lot of options with lighting, but multi-camera setups definitely require a lot more attention to how you're going to light the set and the talent. The other thing that you have to think of now when you are looking at your set design is what shots do I actually want? Do I want close-up shots like we have here, which are basically sort of waist to chest up shots? Most live streams that you have that are more talking head style are going to be this. But you may also want to have shots that are sort of medium shots where you have the talent demoing something and you want to give some perspective between the talent and the thing they're demoing. You may want to have full body shots. You could have intros where somebody's going to be standing in front of a display or a sign or a branded wall or something that you need to have that full shot as well. So this means that you have to have the camera angles worked, you have to have the lenses, you have to have the lighting, and also the backdrop all working together in designing the set to capture each one of these shots that you want to be able to frame. And it's really it's what you would do in any basic camera shoot, but when you're dealing with it in a live set where you can't reset things, it means typically that you'll have multiple cameras, so each one can get the shot. Or you'll have PTZ cameras, but you'll need multiple so you can switch away, adjust the PTZ, and then switch back to it. But that all has to be planned as part of the set. And sometimes for certain shots, you may need to put very small cameras that can be buried in the set itself, that it doesn't stand out. It doesn't have its own stand and its own rigging. It's really just embedded either inside of or behind something that can get the shot without taking up visual space in other shots that you may want planned for the set. So, the headshot versus full body shot has another element to it that you need to consider, and that is the overall lighting. Lighting a full body shot is different than lighting a sort of a closer shot or a medium shot. And that means that you'll need more lighting. You'll also need lighting that's lower in the set in all likelihood, or higher up at a steeper angle so you can get a nice smooth light across the person that you're going to be lighting in a full body. uh, if you're doing green screen, that's another thing that has its own sets of requirements, and we won't talk about that if you're doing a green screen set here. But definitely, it's something that you want to keep in mind. The other thing, though, when you think about shots, is think about shots that you want to use for demonstrations. Now, one of the things that we've done is we have an overhead camera, and if I can pull that up, if you actually look, we have a shot here that lets me go in and do things that are aligned with demos we may want to do. So, this shot now is one other shot, one other camera angle that you're going to need to integrate, and you may need multiple of those. So, in certain cases, you may have another section of your set that you want to do a demo on. So you have a sitting space and then a demo space. Dennis, welcome. Uh, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. When you have lots of camera angles and a fairly broad set, there are a lot of challenges with lighting it. Absolutely. And, I think it's something there are no hard and fast rules. And, if you're in a video studio where you have just one person, one setup, lighting can have some pretty pretty good rules to follow. When you're dealing with a broad set, multiple camera angles, lots of talent, motion on the set, all those things are going to make lighting much more challenging. So, but the things you're going to deal with are not just things like demos, but you may also deal with performance. Now, like to Dennis's point, he may have had an area that's set where people would go over to or do different types of specific presentations. Uh, but you could also turn around and say there may be other types of shows where people have a band on or a musician who's going to play. So these things now require their own sort of mini spaces, and they have to be handled as intelligently and with as much care as the main talent that you'd be dealing with. Uh, so again, just more things to consider, more camera angles, more lighting, all of these things come together with things you have to worry about. The other thing, and it can be sort of a blessing and a curse, is working with depth of field. Uh, what depth of field gives you is the ability to sort of blur out a background if you use shallow depth of field. And from there, you don't have to have everything lined up the same way, yeah, as you would, where if you have a clean, clear shot. So Ken, yeah, there really isn't a great answer for avoiding light reflections with glasses. So we we've tried to work at different angles with this, where we have things that hopefully are at odd angles off from the camera, so it won't pick it up as a direct reflection. And that's something we'll talk about when we talk about uh, other aspects of your set. But it is one of those things. It's a big problem if you're doing green screen work, where you'll get all the green in the lenses. And again, that's the sort of thing where I recommend for most people, if they are doing green screen and can get by without lenses or wear contacts, that would be a much better solution. But yeah, it's a challenge, and it's a challenge in a big space, to sort of the types of spaces Dennis was talking about, where you just have people walking and moving. You can't be really sympathetic to the lighting. You're going to get it sometimes. So it's, if people can avoid wearing them, great. But I'm at that point in my life where I'm pretty much blind without them. So yeah, Dennis is talking about hairspray, but I mean, there are certain things that sometimes people have used where you can, you know, dull the lens or otherwise, take some of that glare off of it. Uh, I'm very open for anybody who has suggestions, because these are the sorts of tips from people who are in the field that are great to have. We've done what we could do in this limited set, but definitely is a problem. So when we're talking about depth of field, it can be helpful because it can let you soften a background and create shots in a set that the detail that's going on behind you doesn't have to be considered. You can just make it soften out and keep the focus on the talent in particular shots. But in other cases, it can become problematic where you're actually trying to get a shot across a broader group of people on a set, and you don't get really great focus on sort of either end of that group that you're working with. So, some of this is often it requires just multiple cameras, multiple shots in advance, camera positioning versus zoom. So, we've talked about how you can change the angle that you get, the field of view that you get, by sort of moving the camera closer and zooming out. So, this will give you different types of shots that, can avoid some of the depth of field issues where you don't want it and still be able to capture a wide enough audience. But this is where having higher quality lenses and replaceable lenses will give you some more flexibility, where your systems that you set up, your cameras that you set up can be swapped out, have lenses swapped based on the needs of a production. Uh, so, Richard, this is a physical production set here. So this is not a green screen. But this is something that, in a lot of cases, you could do this. So, to your point around, is it a green screen? I could have taken a photo of this set, and then if I were traveling or in another location, done a green screen, which would give pretty much the same general sense of where I am in the set. And people sort of get some cues that the lighting and everything isn't the same. But you know, if you want to do sets that are green screen, it's it's a lot better, today than it was even 5 years ago. The quality of the green screens you can get with both, you know, TriCaster or vMix is really pretty impressive, and something where you shouldn't dismiss it out of hand. But you really, if you want to use green screen as a component of your set or as your whole set, it's something you definitely should practice on first and make sure you have it nailed. So, because I think for most people, I would start with a physical set, even if it's very simple, and then as you get more comfortable with the camera work and setting things up, as well as the lighting, you could move to green screen. So Rich is saying, yeah, we haven't compared, going with a green screen versus a a physical set to see how lighting would be different. There's two elements to this that when we look at it that are important. Whatever you're chroma keying in your green screen set will have pre-baked lighting typically, unless you're using very high-end chroma keying systems. Uh, and so you need to match the lighting you have there with the physical lighting, so people don't get that sense of it's not quite right. Something's just not lining up right. And that's the thing with if you go really poor chroma key, where you just have sort of a dumb fake background behind you, and people get it, it's chroma key, and there's no doubt. But when you go for realism, you really need to go the full way because if you sit in that middle space where the lighting in my set doesn't really line up with the lighting that we had with the image we're putting behind us, uh, people may not be able to put their finger on it, but they'll notice something isn't right. They'll become uncomfortable with what they're seeing, and there's sort of this, you know, slope of, I just don't believe it, even though you may think it's real. So something just doesn't sit right. But definitely, getting a green screen set up requires sympathy to the light, sympathy to reflections of light, because green spill gets everywhere. So your clothes get illuminated green, so you have to watch what the talent wears. And other objects in the set, any surface that's shiny, any glass surface, monitors, other things can all pick up that green glow. So hybrid sets, which have some green screen and some physical components, can have an issue with that as well. So just things to consider as you think about integrating green screen. The other thing, if you are thinking about sets that have lots of people and lots of action. I mean, think of a news show where you have people that will walk to talk with each other, where they can come on and off set, where you can have experts come in, where you can have performance things that are going on. You need to understand how that gets what would basically be called sort of blocking a scene. If you think about this is what we're going to do, you have to understand, where do people walk? What camera angles am I going to use when they walk? How do I want people to be set up next to each other? So if I'm going to walk over and talk to somebody, I need to make sure that I have camera angles that can capture both of us talking, capture me, capture them, all of those things, and the lighting has to be good. So when you develop a set, especially if you're going to do things that will have these types of onset movements, you need to also consider how you're going to block that out for the camera work that needs to take place and for the talent. So you'll need sets, and sets will have to have marks, and there'll be traffic areas where people walk, and all of those things. And then your camera lines of sight. So you got to make sure those remain clear all the time, and which cameras you take. So just one of the things you need to consider, and this could actually be more of an issue for shooting events where you're setting up in a space that is a client space, an auditorium, an executive boardroom, a conference space. And when you do those types of setups, you need to have those same types of things in place. So you can give set the stage directions to everybody. Say, when you get up, you got to walk behind the chairs and go over here. So all those things, you have to make sure that the way you set up the set accommodates the type of flow you're going to need, both for the shots as well as for the people as they move around. Now, the other thing that I'm a big fan of, sort of signage and other things, but putting monitors on a set is is not a simple thing if you're doing it in scale. Monitors are basically big pieces of glass mirror, basically. So based on what you have on those monitors and how things are shining on those monitors, you can have all sorts of problems with different types of reflections, different types of glare, things that you want to have seen on the monitor that are blown out because there's too much light shining on it. Uh, so, one of the main things, and you'll see this in most professional environments, is As opposed to placing monitors up on a wall flat, what they'll end up doing is they'll tip them a little so that the lighting and the cameras, as they hit them, are not coming straight on. So you get that glare bouncing back or other types of reflections, but that slight angle, nothing huge, nothing to, distort it, but that slight angle can make a huge difference with how all those other unwanted reflections and light glares impact what's visible on the monitors on the set. So the more monitors, the more challenge that is. Uh, but if you actually go and look at behind the scenes shots of how people have monitors set up on sets, you'll see that sort of very slight, 2 or 3 degree angle coming in on sets. And that will make a world of difference with, the clarity of what people can see. So for us, we have the same thing back here with this monitor where it slopes in much closer at the bottom than at the top. So we're not picking up the lights that we have that are basically sitting there, and the camera angles are not getting that direct bounce back from other objects that may be reflected if we had it as a flat surface. So the other, this is a sort of a meta thing. Uh, when you develop a set, you may not be developing the set for one show. You may be having a set that's a space that you want to be able to do different productions on, where certain components of this need to be able to move around. And this will require pre-planning with how you want to do this. So you don't want to create a fixed set and then just try to do basic set dressing if you have clients that are going to demand a lot of different layouts or have different formats that they're going to want to cover. Even if you have your own show, you may turn around and say, I want a show where have two people sitting across from each other and talking with each other. But that show may have another episode where they want to do like we have here, just somebody at a desk talking. Or there may be something where it's going to be more demo focused and needs a more open space. All of those things should be accommodated in the space you set up for the set. But sometimes the set itself may need to change. So one of the things we found when we built this set was that we sort of boxed it in. We had a set where we had 3 different walls that were part of the set. And we realized after doing this that we didn't get a lot of flexibility. We thought we'd be able to do more camera angles and everything else. But because these set components were basically anchored together, they, became not as convenient as we wanted. But one of the things that we did do is we used what in sort of Hollywood and in theater are called set flats. Basically, thin panels built on wood, sort of a wood frame. So if you look at the image I have on the slide here, it's basically you have a small wooden structure that you put a surface on, and when you skin it with that surface, you can then use that as an element of the set. So when we did that, we bolted it together, sort of created a fixed space. But what you can do is basically create these as movable components. So you could have certain elements of your set which are fixed, other elements that are on these flats that can then be removed, moved around, repositioned, angled differently to create different types of spaces. And that will give you a lot of flexibility. So if you were dealing with what is basically sort of a dead space, like a basement or an attic space or an unused uh, part of an office, any of those things, flats are great for. If you have a space that is multi-use, where it's also your office during the day, flats may not be ideal, and you may really just want to work with set dressing around what you have in place on a day-to-day basis. So it's something to consider. How much flexibility do you need? Do you need these things to be on wheels? How do you handle wiring if you're going to move things around? How do you handle lighting? All of those things need to come into it. But it's better to think about it now than after you've developed something and figure out how to work around something you may have already done. So, just another aspect to keep in mind here when you think of all the requirements of production may have for you. Now, the other thing is really starts to come down to the aesthetic. And there's lots of elements to this, but I think it's very important if you are a personal live streamer that you have some of your own personality in the set. And if you think about what we do when we work with our communities is you create a relationship. You want to let people know a bit more about you. You want them to gravitate towards things that they're comfortable with too, and that they say, "Oh, I love that too," or "I saw that," and it gives that next layer of connection. And that's one of the things I think that you get when you have an actual set. You have the ability now to start to share some of your personality in that set. In a professional space, though, that may mean more of the brand personality. So a brand is cutting edge, it's modern, it's high tech. The way you light the set, the elements that you use to dress the set, the shapes of things on the set, all of those things can communicate brand and can communicate personality. Colors are also a very big piece of this. If you think about a lot of brands, if I say Coca-Cola, people would say, "Oh, I get that red, and I know that sort of thing." Pepsi has the blue. These are subtle things, but I'm sure if you look at a lot of their advertising and a lot of the promotional things that they do, those brand colors are a standing piece of everything they do, and it's consistent from promotion to promotion or ad to ad. So in a set, you had those same types of things. You want to make sure that if you are working with a brand and they have certain color elements that are traditionally associated with them, first get the color right, because coming in, if they say I got blue and you come in with a blue but it's not their blue, that's not going to work. So make sure that when you work with clients on communicating their brand in a set design, that you get that sort of color thing matched. But there are also other types of elements. So for instance, Nike has that big swoosh look, and Apple has the apple with the bite out of it. There's no color in those. Those are basically sort of white, flat looking things. But that shape, that having those types of visual cues that you get in the design of the set overall, those can help communicate brand. So again, think through some of the subtleties. What's the shape of a table I may have there, or a desk, or some of the signage, or the shape of maybe curves I cut in the wall? Does it mirror something that is reflective of the client I'm trying to do that for? So, capturing those things in both color and shape can be important. And one of the great things about shape is that it can take place in shadow. You can curve things in the where you block light from. It can take place in blurry things. So if I had an Apple logo or a Nike logo in the background, it was blurred out because I had a very shallow depth of field. You'd still know what it was. You wouldn't have to read any text. So when you design these things, try to not make text the critical element in communicating brand. Look for these other ways to sort of do that. But in everything you do, think about your personality too. You want to bring something to that when people see it, they also recognize you in this. And if it's your own show, like we have here, yeah, I can have all my little geeky stuff hanging out on a shelf above me, and that's who I am, and sort of that communicates some of that. But I think even if you're doing this for somebody else, you can develop your own signature sort of look and style. And I think that's part of the art of set design is that the more you do that and the more you understand the elements that work and that you feel comfortable working in, that will come through as well with everything. But one last thing before we wrap up is that whatever you do, model your set first. You may think, when you have things on, a piece of paper, it all looks great and this is fine. do a model and do it to scale with everything. The other thing you'll notice in this model image I have here is that there's a lot of space in the front. Model in all the space you need for your cameras. And when you want to look at what you have, when you lay out your set, this will let you know exactly I can put a camera here with this sort of lens and this sort of zoom, and this is the shot I'll get. And then you start to understand, where can I put lighting, where can I place talent, and where can I design the set around. So before you actually commit to something physically, try to model it first. And it doesn't have to be perfect. What you're really looking for is the sense of space, the sense of depth, the different types of shots you can get. If the textures aren't exactly right or whatever, that doesn't matter. Dimensions do matter. So if you're working with a space that's this wide, understand, and build your model specifically around those dimensions and place your cameras and your lighting specifically within those dimensions. Because in a modeling set, it's very easy to sort of say, well, place the camera or the light up here, and there is no up here in the real world. So you have to keep that in mind. And notice in the shot that I did here, I also put a talent stand in here. So this gives us a sense of how would people spatially get associated with the elements in the set. And that can be really important because one of the things that you'll find is that things that you think you have a lot of depth in, when you actually put them on camera, that depth gets compressed somewhat. And so you may find shots look kind of crowded, and the breathability that you thought was in the shots you wanted doesn't show up. And you'll get a lot of that in the model before you even begin working on it. So that's our show today. Hopefully, you got something out of this that was worthwhile. We'll probably revisit sets. And the reason we'll probably revisit sets is that, as I mentioned, we're looking at redesigning our set here. And so in the after show, post show, we're going to go in and talk about some of the thoughts that we have and hopefully get some of your feedback for things that you may like or not like or don't think will work or could suggest that we do better. So we'll dive into that, but we're going to try to document this journey that we do with building this new set and hopefully share that over time. So this will give us some more hands-on real world things that we can share with you about the design and construction and actual implementation of a set. So we'll be doing that shortly in the post show. So before we go, we will be here next week with a designing graphics for an award show. Now, one of the things that we've talked about before is all the stuff about production graphics. And we didn't really cover anything with vMix. So I wanted to give everybody that's uh, using vMix, Title Designer, GT Title Designer, a better understanding of how you could integrate a full graphics package for something like an award show using Title Designer and vMix. So that's what we're going to be covering next week. So until then, if I'm not going to see you in the after show, thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next week. If not, I'll see you in a few minutes. Take care. Thank you. Is this on and off here? Hello? All right. Sorry about that. As I said, we've been having trouble with our wireless transit here, so we're going to have to take a look at that after the show. But so welcome to our post show here. On today's post show, one of the things I wanted to share was some of the thoughts we have around our own new set redesign. So before I get into that, though, I wanted to talk a little bit more about why we Yeah, Dennis, thanks. Yeah, I know we've been struggling with a wireless issue today, so we got to figure out what's going on. But yeah, thanks, Dennis. We're trying our best here to work around that. But so one of the things that we found when after we built this set was that we didn't really we didn't really leverage the entire space we had because when we put up the walls and the flats, we sort of moved in from the outside space. We had walkways and other stuff. And we found that we really just stick with the one shot, which is to the back wall, even though there are, two other sides to the set that we haven't been able to use. So we also found that, as we're looking forward, we want to probably do more things which can have demos that may take up more space, may involve more equipment, may involve more people on set. So we wanted to really look at redesigning this set with that in mind. And so let me go here is the general set design that we're looking at redoing. So all of these things are going to be flats. They're just going to be, sheets that are skinned that have all the elements on them. But what we're going to do is we wanted to create some separation in the back. So if you notice here, we have sort of lighting. So it gives some of that depth that we've talked about. What we have connecting all of these things are basically little joiner pieces. So they're pieces of wood that are almost shaped like little I-beams with a front and a back and a beam going through the middle. And so when we get the flats next to each other, that sort of acts as a joint between them. So it allows us to do that. And then we'll just use sort of sandbags and a weighted platform behind them to make sure everything stays up. We may put them on wheels. We may not. We haven't made that choice yet. But the goal overall was to create something where I could pull this apart and rearrange it any way I wanted. So if I wanted to do things that had a large TV monitor on one side or vertical, monitors that are setting up that we want to do some sort of intro piece from, we could do all those things and not be as constrained. We also wanted to be able to have some walkways. So the ability potentially to change this back end over here where you have a wall, flatten that out so you could have people able to walk on and off set through that as an entrance. And again, that's just another element of flexibility we could get by doing this as all sort of flats that are reassembled. So one of the key things that we were looking at when we did this was what are the different shots? And we really wanted to think of shots in terms of sort of what sort of lens would I be having and what sort of shot would I get with that. So we set up things with sort of large monitors. So everything's to scale. This monitor in here to scale is a 75-inch monitor. So that gives you a sense of actual proportion for everything. So it's not just a sort of a random monitor set. This is the monitor that we're going to be using in the new set. And we didn't focus on in this pass on lighting that much because that's sort of a whole separate exercise. But what we wanted to do was really get a sense of space. How would all these things play out together in a set space? And so this is one shot that we know we'd have, which would be sort of a center shot, fairly wide, 24 millimeter. We'd also looked at this then as sort of a center shot 50 millimeter, which would be a normal sort of, in this case, three-quarter body shot, but it would still capture the entire monitor and the person that was on air. We also wanted to look at shots that would be coming in from the side. So in doing this, we're also looking at sort of a left shot that we can have and a right shot, but both of these would be using 24 millimeters. So we keep both of these fairly wide. So again, either of them could be pulled tighter if we wanted to. But this was where we really started from. We wanted a space that we knew we could easily rearrange, that we could make changes to for branding and other things. So these two flat panels that we have right here in the back of the set, uh, those could be swapped out with a client brand. And so we could do something then if we wanted to have a client shoot something on this set that would have their entire sort of branding view placed there. It gives us that type of flexibility as well. So we don't have to simply work with the panels themselves, but we could replace them. You can also, and one of the cool things about this, if you're not going to do floor shots, you can make flats that are two-sided. So you could flip them around and have something different on the back. So even though you have floor space and storage space for just one, you get two looks from that. And that could be very useful. So you could use that if you have generic things that you want really plain that you can dress for specific clients based on when they come, and others that are more personalized. You can do those types of things. And again, that was something we had in mind here. Uh, we don't have this locked in yet. So clearly for us, this is something that we wanted to think about and really wanted to throw it out to you to know if you guys had any thoughts or opinions on it. So if anybody'd like to just come on and talk, we'd love to have you here. We can bring you on as another presenter here. So just call in.tv/streaming alchemy. Or any thoughts that you may have in the comments section. That would definitely be great. Okay. Well, this is something that I just wanted to share because it's taking up some of the time here for what we're doing, and we definitely want to make sure that whatever we do also works for all of you. So I'll be posting these photos up on the Streaming Alchemy page and on the uh, in the group, and hopefully that will give you a chance to look at them in a little more detail and give some more comments and feedback because, like I said, I want to make sure we do this as well as we can. I never want to say right because my experience is that every time you think you got it right, you don't. You come up to that next thing and it's like, oh, I didn't consider this, or gee, I wish this would have looked better at at 4K than it does. So uh, but this is something that definitely. Oh, Dennis, thank you. We'll continue to post updates as we move along with this, and hopefully we'll be able to make the show more engaging and more meaningful for all of you as well. So that's definitely a big piece of what we want to do here. So all right, everyone. Then thank you for hanging around, and I'll see everybody next week. Oh, we have another question. Oh, what's the size of the space, John? Thank you. Uh, the space itself that we're working with is about 18 feet across. We have about 12 feet up to a drop down in the ceiling, and then we have about another same width. About just 17 and a half feet back to a wall, which is about another 12 feet. So the full space with everything we need for the production is about 24 feet deep by about 18 feet wide. So definitely something that we can work in. We do have pillars here that we have to work around, so that definitely impacts the shots we can do. The ceiling height is 7'10". So everything we deal with has to work with that, and that comes into sort of planning shots as well. So you don't want to emphasize a lower ceiling when you're on camera because that can make the space feel more claustrophobic. But we still want to have shots that feel wide enough and open enough that it invites people in, and they don't feel like every shot's this little tight, squared up shot. So we're working with that as our baseline, but you know, using space, it's always Jesse. Hi, thank you. I appreciate that. Uh, using space is always dicey because you have the equipment, you have the lighting, you have the cameras, you have the angles, and I mean the other thing which I didn't bring out in the show, and I probably should have now that I'm thinking about it, you actually have storage. You have to keep all the stuff that isn't on camera somewhere, and you know so yeah, Ken. Yeah, I mean, The sort of the beigey eggshell kind of panels that we have, we're definitely thinking about how to light those correctly. We're thinking of potentially doing side lighting and bringing that in. So, maybe doing a track of light that could go along these. Let me go back. This may be a better shot. Yeah, to do a track of light that could sort of go along here, washing out. We were thinking potential also of raising these sort of striped areas, wooded striped areas, and lighting behind it. We're still thinking we want to make sure it works and adds to the depth. Uh, the other thing is this joiner piece that we have in the middle. We're looking at that as sort of having a little bit of a special edge to it to sort of join the two wood pieces. That may also be something we could illuminate. So another set of thoughts in this, but trying to figure out how to light that up correctly and light it in a way that gets picked up by camera. One of the things that we found, and it's interesting, is that the more lighting you have on set, the harder it is to do these types of accent lights without them blowing out. And so this is something that we're going to be playing with a bit to see how much light will actually fall onto the set. Uh, yeah, that's a. We actually use the LifeX strips, which have great control, so I can go and light up segments of one strip, all different colors. I can animate them and do other things. So definitely something we're looking at to create more light and depth. And Ken, thanks for that because it's the getting this right is really tough. So we'll probably do to Ken's suggestion, we'll probably do some sample shots and other things where we'll illuminate things, bring them on set, and try to make sure we get those right before we commit. But we'll definitely share all that stuff with you. And if you guys have any things that you could send us, that would be great. If you have you know, favorite sets that you loved and, would say, "Oh, this aspect of it I thought was great." We're we're all ears for that to try to figure out the best way uh, to get this set to look the way we want it to. So definitely something that could be cool. And that goes every even if it's something that we can't share publicly, just let us know. But we definitely would love to see examples that you guys have found seem to work really well, and any other sort of lighting setup information for that because I think that's the yeah we do Photoshop and we actually if I go back here we use Lightwave too. So I have the ability to go in there with, very specific models and then, play with lighting and color and everything else. And the great thing that I have with doing this with something like Lightwave is that I can actually simulate the surface properties, so I can see how the light would react with it. So, I mean, I think Ken, you're right. The place to start is with Photoshop always, because to me, that's the does it even look right? If it doesn't pass the Photoshop test, it doesn't go beyond that. But when I want to really start to see how things work with reflection, diffusion, how it carries on a surface, how light falls off across the surface. That's where a modeling tool gives me that next level down. So it lets me move from the general visual aesthetic into the implementation. How bright do the lights need to be? What colors and everything else do I have? So, I think the control room's telling me we may have a caller here. So, okay, we're going to be getting somebody switched in here in a moment. Hey, John, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. So thank you for joining us here.
Well, I really felt that it's unfair you get left on your own all the time, so I thought I'd come in and this is an interesting discussion. It takes me back to my youth.
So,
I was a member of the stage crew at school.
oh, yes.
So, yeah, we were into lighting and stage design then.
It's really interesting because when you deal with it in theater, you it is different because the camera is different and the camera sees things differently. And stage lighting has a drama to it that's very difficult to capture in camera. So, when you do things, you can create dramatic atmospheres that sort of sit across the stage, as well as, the lighting for people to see the action on stage. And I always love that about the theater, in that sense, because it you paint on a palette that's huge that no camera would ever capture. And, that's a fun thing to do.
Yeah, and there's that big difference between stage and TV and Facebook Lives because
Yeah.
you're talking about a large stage for your new setup. I'm living here in a room which is effectively it is a bedroom box room. It is 8 foot by 8 foot. It's probably not even 8 foot by 8 foot actually. It's probably a little bit smaller than that, but it is a very, very small space. And so I've been trying to work out where I would put multiple cameras. And as you can see, I'm turning towards you because I've already started using my webcam to the side of all my screens.
Yep.
I find that's a more personal way to talk to people when I'm doing Zoom interviews and things like that, rather than the old way, which would be the screen would be below or above, and so you'd be doing
Yep.
this. I found that was very unnatural. So taking the idea of the camera angle, the interview camera angle being at 30 degrees,
Yep.
I thought it was actually better to have the camera there so I could talk to the person. I could then turn to the computer, and it was obvious I was turning to the computer, and then I was turning back to them. So it was a bit more natural than the old, you know,
Yes.
looking
Well,
above you, looking below you thing.
yeah. I mean, getting it's something I still struggle with. So I can be, getting that sort of connection with the camera when you're talking to an audience is not easy, and especially when you're trying to get some sort of reference monitor back. If you're the only person sitting in a set, you're you don't really have anybody you're talking to, so you are talking to the camera. That's your audience. That's your everybody that you want to engage with. So creating that sort of connection is very important in everything you do on a camera. And so, like, even right now, because to me, I'm looking at the camera here, but your video's coming in right below me there. So I tend to be moving between the two because I my natural inclination to make genuine eye contact versus sort of the simulated eye contact of a camera
It
is,
is so hard.
yes.
It is so hard. I have a trick for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, it's actually a really obvious trick, but I run if I'm doing a big event or a presentation,
Yep.
then I will, if I can get this without breaking everything. So I've got one of those portable screens,
Yep.
and I connect that to the PC, and then I take that over here where I have the good old teleprompter,
Yep.
and I put this screen into the teleprompter. So instead of looking at a script
Yep.
from the teleprompter, I'm actually looking at a computer screen, which can then display either the person I'm
Wasn't.
talking about or the PowerPoint presentation that I'm doing. And so I look through the PowerPoint presentation to the screen, to the
Yep.
camera, or I look at the person through the screen to the camera. So I don't have that problem that I have at the moment, which is you're just there
Yep.
and
I know.
looking at to making sure
Yep.
you're still there in the corner of
Yes,
my eye,
indeed. Yep.
and I do it that way. And that's actually been my most effective use of my teleprompters. In fact, it's been so successful that that is the second teleprompter screen I've got. And
Yep.
I've got that one. That's a proper dedicated, teleprompter screen. But the other teleprompter screen I had, I bought a um, 60/40 split
Yep.
glass in a little frame. That's all
Yep.
I bought. I'm in the UK, so it had to be shipped over from the States, and it got here without breaking. It's just about big enough to put a small laptop,
Yep.
display a small laptop screen through it. Because the other problem I had, of course, was if I was going to be away from the camera and the teleprompter's too small, then there's no detail there. So I had to get a big one
Yeah.
as well. And that is the way that I'm trying to do it because I'm I'm not at your level. I'm not doing webinars to big groups, but I am starting to do webinars to small select groups, and I'm trying to improve personal touch to the webinars. I'm trying to become
Yep.
distinctly different from those pre-recorded webinars where they just stand there and script into a camera, and then that's the webinar.
Yeah, I
So
think the biggest problem most webinars have to me is that they're so impersonal. It's like somebody blathering. It's like a long infomercial, and I don't think that
yeah,
that should be the heart of a webinar. I mean, you want to connect with people where they are. What are you trying to accomplish, and how can we help you get there? And that requires a certain personal connection. I mean, people have to trust you. People have to sort of feel that you're talking to them and not at them. And all of these things, they're subtle cues, but their effectiveness depends on establishing that relationship, that trust, those types of things. So it's definitely something I think if you could bring that as a breath of fresh air into that space, I would love to see that. I mean, that's part of where we've been, as a business with our company NeuralNet. We did things around bringing like callers in. So, like for you to come in and join
yeah.
us here, we think that approach to engagement is important, where people feel like, yeah, I could just come and sit down and talk with you and drop off. And integrating that into a webinar, I think would be great. There's a certain unscripted element to it, but
Yeah.
I think there's a realism element. There's a believability element there where you're talking to a real person, and anybody that you're giving a webinar to could jump in and sort of talk with you. Then, I think those types of things become really, really valuable over time, and two-way engagement is just going to become more and more available through a lot of the different platforms. I think Facebook's been looking at it, and I think they want to do more with it. They have things like polling and other stuff. But I think all of these things are going to sort of move us to dropping some of these barriers with online, where it becomes much more bidirectional. And I would love to see you you do something on that front that can sort of push the envelope, because I think that would be great.
Well, there is one guy that's ahead of me on this, um, and he's got a big budget. He's turning over millions. He's got a very big budget. He's called Billie Jean Shaw,
Okay.
and all he really does well is Facebook advertising. So he's a Facebook marketing
Yep.
expert, and he does for his. Yeah, you have to pay to join the group, but when you join his group, and there are thousands of people in his group, so
Yep.
he has a big webinar, and he does a live every Tuesday night. He does a live presentation. Actually, it's not Tuesday night. It's Tuesday night for us because we're in the UK.
Yep.
Tuesday morning for him in the States. But he does a live webinar. He's got multiple cameras.
Yep.
Um, he's got a big screen. He's actually got a row of comfortable chairs so people can pay a premium and sit in the auditorium, so to speak, with him.
Yep.
And most of the times, he will get his mobile phone out and he will have a customer of his, in other words, one of his paid Facebook ad people,
Yep.
will phone in. They will give the details to the backroom staff of their Facebook ad, and he will pull it apart and then put it back together again as a better product live on stage during the webinar. And that is and he does it really powerfully. And he's got multiple cameras, so he can go from him to the stage
Right.
to his laptop that he's using to work through the process to another shot that's his back team can pull up pages and
Yep.
examples for him as well. And he runs that, and it is the best. It's the best. It's not perfect, but none of these things are. But it is a really powerful because he does a very simple thing, but he does it every week to a different Facebook ad. But he's got all the technology and he's making use of that. I mean, he's even been times when he said, "Oh, we need to go upstairs," and then he's literally live challenging his engineer. Can we get upstairs? Can we go up with stairs with the camera? Can we?
Yeah.
We want to go now. I want it. No, and it's very good. But yeah. I mean, we've talked offline about the A10 Mini.
Yep.
which gives the chance of people to deliver a multi-camera setup into a effectively a signal like a webcam,
Yep, and it's
and
1080p, so you get the
it's
resolution for stuff.
1080p.
Yep.
So that should be perfect for. I mean, I thought that the original takers of it were going to be YouTubers and YouTube gamers, but I'm playing around with it. I'm trying to get confident using it, and I can see now that it's perfect for Facebookers. I mean, crikey,
Yep.
if I want to get ahead of Billie Jean, then maybe I need to work out how to get my cameras working on TikTok.
I think it's gonna be a little difficult to 8-second marketing or whatever whatever the flip is on that, but yeah, this is, how to go from, how to cover that in that sort of window. But, I think a big piece of it is being where you're passionate and comfortable too. So, whatever aspect of this, for some people, they may be looking and saying, I need help with Facebook ad marketing, which has its own Byzantine rules and optimizations that go with it. But for a lot of other people, there are so many different areas where this could become effective, from just confidence in speaking, the ability to organize presentations that are engaging, not reading the slides, well, all of these types of things that you wanted, that people out there have a hunkering to do and have sort of a day in, day out practical need to do. I think there's a big open space, and whatever it is that you say is sort of, here's the niche I want to fit in, and grow that out. I think the biggest part is having the right vision, and then you sort of
Yeah,
grow into your vision, as opposed to, yeah, I'm just going to get a bunch of people and I'm going to try to get as much money, and yes, it's like I just burn out. There is no vision here. There's no approach that I have, or nothing unique I'm offering. I'll just, get up there and blather for a bit, and hopefully something good comes of it.
yeah, and we there's a. I mean, I suppose it's happened about over the last year or so. There's been a real step change because only a little while ago we thought that having a webcam over your TV
Yep.
and you were playing a computer game and you have some bland background behind you was was amazing. And suddenly within 12 months, we're now talking about those sort of people running multiple cameras
Yeah.
um, while they're still playing their game. So they've got their screen, they've got multiple webcams, multiple cameras of any sort.
Yep.
Um, So nowadays they now want to have one coming down and showing their controller. I mean, I'm a flight simulator guy, so we have joysticks and
Yep.
sticks and things like that. So putting a camera on that is much more interesting than in maybe a lot of other hobbies. But they have different camera angles, and it's
Yep. I mean,
it is a step change in the technology, and it is, as you say, it's fascinating to see where people are going. And suddenly, as you say, this issue of the room, there's been quite a few of the YouTubers who've been doing videos recently, and they've done YouTube videos, which I thought was really boring, and saying, "This is how we designed our set," and their set, just a couch.
yeah.
It's just a couch with a wall. But they do a video about how they put this couch out and what color they painted this wall, and they get tens of thousands of views, which only proves that what you're doing, John, is great and is on the nail because people are doing little bits of it. Their experience is what they're doing. And there are thousands, tens of thousands of people watching those videos because, again, they want to go from the one camera situation
Yep.
to a proper camera situation, and they want to get the lighting right, and they want to get the stage design right to look
Yeah.
interesting but not over cluttered. My other camera usually sits on the opposite side, and then my background is my DBX 286, which I use to kill all the background sounds
Yep.
um, live. And then it's got a row of books, and they're all the internet marketing books that you would expect an internet marketing guru to have. So I've got them all lined up. So they're there to be seen. And quite often when I do photos, I'll do the photo with them in the background because I want people to see them. Especially it's even more fascinating when the person that wrote the book sees his book in my background and then sends me a message.
Not that that's
And
you
it,
know John, I'd actually love to have you come on for a show. We've sort of talked about this offline, but if you're open, I'd love to have you talk about sort of how you are looking at the webinar space, where you see, where you want to go, where you see that whole space. Because I think it's actually an exciting space, even though if you hear it up front, it'd be like, oh, that's sort of, a little bookish and, not particularly thrilling. But I think there's so much territory, open in that space
But do
to
you know why people think that, John? Do you know why people think that?
why.
Because most of the marketing people that are stuffing out, um, filling out our Facebook and our YouTube with ads, trying to sell us stuff, most of all of that is what we talked about at the beginning. It's those pre-recorded, have nothing to do with you. You watch it, I'll give you an offer, and I expect you to buy it.
Yep.
Videos,
Yep.
and there's a world of difference between those. And I am very bad because when I go on webinars, I always make a comment at the beginning. And if the person responds to my comment and they're live, I'll carry on watching it. And if they
Yep.
don't, I just leave because I know all I'm getting is a pre-recorded video. But if they say they're live and they don't reply to my comment, then they're just faking it.
Yeah. I mean,
And we get to the point now when people are, as you say, finding that live videos, my webinar series I'm running at the moment, my longest webinar series, is actually on behalf of Toastmasters, the speaking club.
so-
So it's got to be a reasonable presentation. Otherwise, they're going to tell me that well, I'm sorry, John, but all those ums that I counted 6 R's in your presentation, you obviously didn't rehearse it before you gave it to us.
So, I mean, I think when you talk, I mean, I can tell right away just by talking to you. You have an element of engagement that isn't in a lot of folks. Something that I probably need to improve on my end as well. But it's when I you get that sense, and I think that's the heart of it. If you can connect with the person that you're watching, and hopefully then engage with them after you sort of visually connect and sort of have an emotional connection, it's like, okay, I actually want to talk with them. I want to ask questions. I want to get involved. That's anything else after that is sort of gravy. You could be talking about anything, but if you don't have those sort of key engagement elements established in with your audience, you're not going to be successful, no matter what your set looks like, or your sound gear or camera work is. That doesn't matter. It's that first level of engagement that I think is critical, and that's clearly something you have when just you sitting back casually in your studio, you get the same sense. So that's something that carries over very well.
Yeah, but I've improved that because I'm a member of Toastmasters. And so every couple of weeks, I'm standing up and doing some sort of talk to a group of people who I know will criticize how well I do it. And I've been doing webinars and presentations ever since you could. And I was doing seminars before all this technology came along.
Yeah,
But
it's funny.
my secret is having a live audience, and that's probably something which is more difficult to get online. So I practice to a live audience, and I then pretend they're all there behind the camera, and hope that there really are people behind the camera.
Well, I was about to say, one of the funny things for me is that I've done a lot of stuff in front of like conferences and other things. I can read a room, and you can read people and sort of get a sense of the reaction and how people are responding and adapt. You don't get that when you're live. If it's not in the
No,
comment, you have no way to know. Am I just rambling off into the distance, and people are tuning me out, or and that is
yeah,
that is really the single hardest thing. I'd rather stand in front of a large room of people and talk than get in front of a camera where I have no feedback, because you don't know what you're doing with that. Jesse, hi.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's a good point, Jesse. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's quite funny because a lot of these insecure guys running webinars, the first thing they say is, "Well, tell us all where you're from," because he just wants to know there's some feedback out there from the people.
Yeah, it is hard. And, I think that's probably one of the most challenging things with getting started with live streaming is that first time you're sitting there and you're just talking to a camera. It's like, and the reality is, when you start out live streaming, you probably are just talking to a camera.
Watching. Okay.
Your first few shows are not going to have people flocking to your doors. So I think, and I'm sure you know this if you've done stuff with Toastmasters, you don't get you don't get good right away. And you have to be willing to accept personal milestones of progress and not be comparing yourself to everybody else. What is it I'm working on now? What is it I'm trying to do better? How am I trying to reach the audience better and become more accessible? All of those things are goals you set for yourself. And you can't get discouraged. You can't say, well, I did 10 shows and I get 5 people to watch. Why the hell am I doing this? You've got to sort of look at this and say, this is a long-term process, long-term learning experience. And, it just comes with time. You're not going to be good at it fast. It has its own cycle.
Yeah, and that's probably why in another associated industry, the podcast world, most of the really popular podcasts are conversational podcasts. They're interview podcasts because again, if you bring another person into the show, like I've popped up to see you, it's more interactive. You've got two brains thinking about things and bouncing off each other. When you're doing it one on none,
Yep.
then there is nobody else to bounce that off. There is nobody else to feedback. And then of course you've got this wonderful thing that when people do give feedback, as you and I know, and those that have tried it know, they can be 20, 30, 40 seconds behind on the video. And you have to track back and think, well,
What did,
comment came with 30 seconds ago. So what were they referring to 30 seconds ago? And how do I now deliver that back to the audience, knowing there's a 30-second delay in the return of that message again?
yep. And and you're always, when you're live, people aren't comfortable with the silences. And that's in conversations and everything else. I think that's very important, where you give yourself a time to think where your mouth isn't running. you know, oh, okay, let me think how I want to respond to something, or what I want to say about something. And Ken says to discuss pacing. How fast or slow do you talk? So,
Whoa. Oh, Ken, I'm gonna have to tell you then. You
yeah,
got the you got the four P's. You've got pitch. So don't carry on talking at the same pitch all the time. This is a Toastmaster rule. You've got pace. And the answer to what you're saying on pace is you need to change the pace. I want to give emphasis and I'll slow down. When I get excited about something, I'll speed up, but I've got to remember to not stay in that high speed all the time. So yeah, the pace is an interesting thing. You've got to vary the pace depending how you got to make highs and lows during your conversation as you would any normal conversation. I actually did consider getting a teddy bear and sticking a teddy bear there and jamming the camera into the teddy bear. So at least I've got a teddy bear to refer to. I've got something inanimate to look at.
so
But I couldn't do it to my teddy bear. It's been with me for 50, 60 years. It's not gonna get it's not gonna get hurt now.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
But yeah,
well, we'll state clearly, no bears were hurt in the
we'll
making
hurt
of
during
this
the
video
video.
here.
Yeah.
So, well, John, we definitely have to have you on, because clearly
Okay.
there's interest, and I think the whole concept of speaking in public versus speaking online, as well as webinars and what you see, there's a fertile ground there. So I'm sure we can come up with some interesting topics to discuss. So if you're open, let's try to get John next month, and
Yeah.
we'll
Sure.
make something happen. So,
Okay.
right. Does anybody out there have any questions for John or myself? We're here, or like to join in? We can certainly add a third person if you want.
And now we have to wait the 20, 30
I think
seconds for
that's,
the reply to come back.
yes, indeed. This is it is a funny thing, because you're right. You're living. There's a two temporal zones, that it's what I'm saying now and what I said, and work with reactions. So John Holland.
These people that
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think everybody seems to be good. So John Holland just wished us a good weekend. So John, same to you. Thank you. So
Thank you. All the Johns together.
yes, all the Johns together. Yes. So well, Mr. Drinkwater, thank you very much for joining us here. And
You're welcome.
so I will connect with you offline, and we'll set something up to get you on the show.
Okay then.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you very much for taking your Friday night and spending it here. I definitely appreciate that.
That's all right. It avoids Brexit, but then we won't talk about that.
All right. Understood. All right, John. You take care. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. So, thank you all for joining us here, for being part of the post show here. And, as to remind everybody, we said next week we're going to be talking about creating an award show with all the graphics using vMix and GT Title Designer. So, that should be a fun show too. So, I hope to see all of you then. Have a great week. Take care, everyone.